10 years ago, an 18-year-old woman vanished from her bedroom in Canyon City, Colorado, leaving behind the quiet hum of a small-town night and a family home that should have been safe. It was late September 2016, and the crisp mountain air drifted through half-open windows, carrying the scent of pine and the faint highway exhaust from below. The police initially leaned toward the simplest explanations. Perhaps she had walked off to clear her mind. Or maybe she had decided to start fresh somewhere else. No foul play evident. But her younger brother never believed such explanations. Something about the way Dora's room remained untouched, her night shift uniform neatly folded, and the faint glow of her bedside lamp still casting soft shadows on the walls told him otherwise. For a decade, the case remained unresolved. 10 years would pass before an ordinary, modern process requiring biometric data, something as mundane as a routine submission of fingerprints, would collide with a trace preserved from that night in 2016, triggering a chain of events that would change everything Dora's family thought they knew. At the time of her disappearance, Canyon City was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, where diner regulars could spot a new face instantly, and where night shifts meant returning home to a quiet, sometimes empty house. Dora's life was simple, structured, and painfully ordinary: work, meals, brief visits with her parents, and the occasional chat with neighbors. Dora had always been gentle and observant, moving through the world with a quiet attentiveness. She noticed the way the sunlight caught the mountains at dawn, how the diner's neon sign flickered at closing time, and how her mother's hands carried the faint scent of lavender soap. Shy and conflict-averse, Dora had learned to keep her worries close, managing the small anxieties of teen life with internal strategies rather than words. She was known for reliability. Her coworkers trusted her to handle late-night cash shifts. Her family knew she would always be home before dark, and friends relied on her quiet steadiness. Her bedroom reflected her personality: minimal furnishings, neatly organized books, a small framed photo of her and her brother on the last day of summer camp, and a knit-stand lamp that emitted a warm amber glow. Windows faced the quiet street, where only occasional cars passed by, their headlights tracing lines across the floorboards. The faint ticking of a clock mixed with the distant hum of a furnace and the occasional creak of the house settling, a soundtrack that normally brought comfort, but on that night would become the backdrop for absence and uncertainty. Even as the hours stretched into the early morning, the house remained steeped in a fragile sense of safety. Her family slept unaware of what was unfolding just beyond their perception, while outside, the world was quiet enough for someone to move undetected. The subtle shadows and muted sounds of night hinted at possibilities that would haunt Dora's family for years, that a life could be stolen quietly, leaving only the echoes of routine, trust, and expectation. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? Dora Carter's life in Canyon City was defined by rhythm and predictability, each day slipping into the next with small, reassuring gestures. She lived with her parents and her younger brother in a modest 2-story home perched on the edge of town, where the mountains framed every sunrise. Mornings began with the faint smell of coffee brewing downstairs, her mother humming quietly in the kitchen while her brother prepared for school. Dora's own schedule was different. Her late-night diner shifts meant she often rose later in the morning, preparing breakfast for herself, tidying her bedroom, and stealing moments to read before her first bus or shift call. The home itself was orderly, each piece of furniture carefully placed, familiar. The worn sofa in the living room, the faded curtains in the dining area, and the small wooden desk in Dora's room all spoke to years of quiet family life. Windows framed the street outside, offering views of neighbors tending gardens, mailboxes lined up along cracked sidewalks, and the occasional dog trotting past. A back door, left unlocked for convenience, led to a narrow alley where deliveries and late night, Returns often passed unnoticed, an ordinary feature that would later reveal its significance. Dora's closest relationship was with her younger brother, who admired her patience and reliability. He would often linger in the doorway of her room, asking trivial questions about homework or diner gossip, and she would respond with gentle, measured attention. Her parents relied on her level-headed presence, appreciating how she could anticipate family needs without prompting. Beyond the household, Dora had friends from school and coworkers at the diner, but her circle was small and defined, reinforcing her shy, reserved nature. Her daily routines left a clear trail of predictability. Morning chores, occasional errands with her mother, school or diner shifts, quiet evenings reading or listening to music, and the final preparation for sleep in her neatly arranged bedroom. Peripheral adults, neighbors, delivery drivers, even the occasional repair worker might notice her presence but rarely questioned the boundaries of her routines. Her life was structured, observable, and seemingly safe, yet the very regularity made her movements predictable, a vulnerability unnoticed at the time. Evenings were often quiet. On the night before her disappearance, the kitchen smelled faintly of reheated soup, the hum of the refrigerator mingling with the ticking of the hallway clock. Dora followed her usual pattern, a brief chat with her parents, checking the mailbox for notes or small bills, and slipping into her room as the sun dipped behind the Rockies. The dim glow of her bedside lamp illuminated her favorite possessions: a worn paperback, a notebook filled with sketches and thoughts, and a silver locket she rarely wore outside. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the laundry her mother had folded earlier, grounding the home in comfort and familiarity. Outdoors, the town settled into its small night rhythms. Distant cars hummed along the highway. The wind rustled through pine needles, and the occasional bark of a dog echoed down quiet streets. Everything suggested normalcy, yet the very peace that defined her home and town would soon fracture. Within the predictable cadence of Dora's life, there were unnoticed gaps and unlocked doors, subtle openings that would allow a shadow to enter where a light and trust had always prevailed. The day of Dora Carter's disappearance began like any other, steeped in the familiar cadence of Canyon City life. At 7:15 a.m. on that crisp September morning in 2016, she rose to the soft clatter of breakfast dishes, quietly making herself a bowl of oatmeal while her younger brother rushed off to school. Her mother moved through the kitchen humming, unaware that this ordinary morning would be the last time the family would see Dora in the safe confines of their home. By 8:30 a.m., Dora had checked her schedule at the diner for her evening shift, running a mental checklist of tasks and errands before the night ahead. The afternoon drifted uneventfully. Dora folded laundry, straightened her room, and watched the faint gold light settle over the rooftops of the small town. Outside, neighbors tended gardens and parked trucks idled along the main street. Her world was orderly, measured, and yet in its quiet predictability lay a vulnerability that would go unnoticed. By 5:10 p.m., she stepped outside briefly to fetch the mail, the mountains casting long shadows across the street, the wind carrying the scent of approaching autumn. Each movement she made, each routine step, was an invisible map that someone could observe without ever leaving a trace. Evening arrived, and Dora prepared for her shift at the diner. She lingered in her bedroom for a moment longer than usual, straightening her desk and placing her worn notebook back in the drawer. The glow from her bedside lamp painted the walls a warm amber. Outside, the neighborhood fell into the hushed tones of early night, the creak of a gate swinging on its hinge, the distant hum of cars along the highway, the occasional bark from a dog padding along the quiet street. By 10:45 p.m., her parents had retired to their bedroom, the soft cadence of a television in the living room fading to silence. Her brother, asleep under a mountain pattern quilt, stirred only occasionally. In that stillness, a fleeting, Almost imperceptible disturbance occurred. A shadow flickered past Dora's bedroom doorway, or so her brother would later remember in fragments, half awake, half dreaming. A shape bent near the bed, a movement that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Yet he reassured himself it was nothing, a trick of the lamp's glow or the mind's imagination. He drifted back into sleep, unknowing that this fleeting impression marked the first encounter with the presence that would steal Dora from her home. When morning broke, the illusion of safety shattered. At 6:30 a.m., Dora's mother called out to rouse her for breakfast, her voice bouncing off the walls of an empty room. Panic took hold as the mother's calls went unanswered. The neat bed, the folded laundry, the desk lamp still glowing softly, everything suggested Dora had simply vanished. Frantic searching swept through the house, the backyard, and the quiet street beyond. Anxiety rippled through every corner, uncertainty blossomed into dread, and the family confronted the impossible reality. Dora was gone. The local sheriff's office was contacted. Patrol cars crunched along gravel driveways, lights cutting through the early morning mist. Officers documented every corner of the bedroom, cataloged every personal item left behind, and questioned family members, each moment intensifying the gut-wrenching tension that something far more sinister than a voluntary departure had occurred. And if stories like this keep you pulled in, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss what comes next. The early morning sun glinted off evidence markers in the yard, highlighting faint scuff marks, the imprint of adult-sized footprints, and a disturbed patch of grass near the back porch. Canyon City, usually sleepy at this hour, hummed with the urgency of a community alarmed by an unspeakable absence. The first patrol car parked in the driveway, officers stepping onto the property with measured caution, each aware that this was no ordinary missing person case. By sunrise, Canyon City was stirring with an urgency that the town rarely knew. The sheriff and his deputy arrived, methodically combing through the Carter residence. Every detail of Dora's bedroom was documented. The neatly folded diner uniform still on the chair, the small pile of laundry on the floor, the bedside lamp casting long shadows over her open notebook. Windows were examined for signs of forced entry, the back door inspected for disturbance. The officers noted the faint footprints and the scuff marks near the doorway, the slight indentation in the carpet where something or someone had paused. Each observation, recorded in careful handwriting on yellowed pads, painted a picture of a departure that had not been Dora's choice. Outside, the community mobilized quickly. Neighbors, friends, and volunteers fanned out across the streets, alleys, and surrounding fields. K-9 units padded over dew-dampened grass, noses close to the earth, seeking the faintest trace of a trail. Canoes and kayaks were prepared to comb the nearby river, while hikers and locals swept through the thick patches of pine and scrub that bordered the town. Children stayed indoors, mothers offered coffee to anxious volunteers, and the town's usual quiet was replaced by the low hum of frantic coordination. Amid the search, subtle yet crucial evidence emerged. On the edge of the yard, a silver charm bracelet, Dora's favorite, engraved with her initials, lay partially hidden beneath the shrubs. Nearby, flattened grass suggested that someone had knelt or paused, perhaps to check a path or gather their bearings. Drag marks etched into the soil led toward the tree line at the property's edge, faint but deliberate, signaling movement away from the home. One adult-sized footprint pressed into the damp earth, sharply defined despite the early morning light, pointed toward the hills beyond. Photographs were taken, evidence bags prepared, all under the constraints of 2016's limited technology for field documentation. Back at the home, the sheriff reviewed witness accounts. Dora's brother described a fleeting shadow near her bed, the half-glimpse of a presence he couldn't place. Adults at first doubted the story, attributing it to a dream, a trick of the light, or the natural anxiety of a sibling. Yet, the mark of footprints, the scattered bracelet, and the drag impressions confirmed the intuition that had gnawed at him. Something real had entered the room that night. The community felt the weight of that realization. Volunteers returned from fields with empty hands, but the unease lingered. Even in routine spaces, the diner where Dora worked, the sidewalk she walked, the bus stop she frequented, neighbors noticed her absence as an eerie void. Each small clue, taken alone, might have been dismissed. Together, they told a narrative of abduction, a sequence of deliberate actions that had snatched Dora from the predictable rhythm of her life. By late morning, the sheriff stood in the yard, absorbing the collective evidence. The quiet of the mountains pressed around the town, indifferent to human suffering, while the small objects and impressions left behind whispered a truth that could not be ignored. Dora's disappearance was not voluntary. The careful collection of evidence, limited yet precise, foreshadowed the painstaking journey the investigation would take, a journey that would stretch across years. Decades even, before modern technology would finally illuminate the night of 2016. Back at the sheriff's office, the investigation shifted from immediate search to careful reconstruction. The deputy and lead investigator spread photographs across the wooden table, scrutinizing each footprint, each scuff mark, each trace of Dora's presence left behind. They compared the shadows in the bedroom, the flattened grass outside, and the scattered charm bracelet, concluding that the 18-year-old diner waitress had not left of her own accord. The case was formally upgraded from missing person to abduction, a rare but necessary classification for Canyon City in 2016. Every note and photograph was meticulously filed, a detailed chronology of a night that would haunt the town for years. A preliminary suspect list emerged quickly, focusing on those with access to the Carter home and familiarity with Dora's routines. Neighbors, local repairmen, and even regular diner patrons were discreetly interviewed. One individual, a handyman who had occasionally worked on the Carter property, became the prime focus. He knew the layout of the house, had been seen near the yard on several occasions, and had a history of minor infractions that raised unease. The investigators scrutinized his movements, noting gaps in his alibi and inconsistencies in statements. Yet, as the questioning progressed, a solid piece of objective evidence emerged. Work records confirmed that on the night of Dora's disappearance, he had been logged at a distant town, miles away from Canyon City, with multiple witnesses attesting to his presence. His shoes, when examined, bore tread patterns inconsistent with the footprints outside Dora's home. Gradually, suspicion shifted, leaving him exonerated. The red herring, while initially consuming investigative energy and emotional bandwidth, underscored the thoroughness of the local law enforcement team and highlighted the difficulty of reconstructing events in the absence of a direct witness. Searches expanded beyond the immediate property. Fields, wooded slopes, and the banks of the nearby river were scoured for days. State authorities offered guidance, noting that the calm, confident nature of the abduction suggested careful planning and familiarity with the terrain. Still, no new evidence emerged. There were no sightings of a suspicious vehicle, no ransom notes, no digital footprints to follow. The clock of the investigation ticked relentlessly, and yet the leads dried up, leaving the case suspended in frustration and uncertainty. The emotional toll on Dora's family was profound. Her parents oscillated between hope and despair, replaying the last evening in their minds countless times. Her brother carried a quiet, gnawing guilt, haunted by the shadow he thought he'd imagined. For the investigators, the file became a constant reminder of limitations, resources stretched thin, technology inadequate, and time slowly eroding the trail. Eventually, the decision was made to classify the case as inactive, the official designation of a cold case in the sheriff's office. The evidence and photographs were stored carefully, the chronological notes filed in a manila folder. The folder then placed on a shelf among other unresolved cases. Life in Canyon City resumed its rhythms, but for those closest to Dora, each day remained marked by absence and uncertainty. If you want to know what investigators uncovered next, go ahead and like this video. The box labeled with Dora Carter's name and the year 2016 was gently set on a high shelf in the records room. Dust settling over its contents, a silent witness to a night that had forever altered the course of her family's lives. Years passed, and Canyon City itself seemed to drift slowly forward. Businesses opening and closing, streets repaved, and new faces filling the corners once familiar. Within the sheriff's office, staff changed as retirements and transfers reshaped the force. Computers replaced typewriters, digital databases began to emerge, and evidence storage rooms underwent reorganizations and renovations. Yet through it all, the box containing Dora Carter's case remained untouched, a silent sentinel of a night that had left no answers. The folder, slightly yellowed at the edges, contained photographs of the bedroom, the faint scuff marks on the floor, the flattened grass in the backyard, and the single adult-sized footprint leading toward the woods. Each item carefully bagged and labeled seemed almost inconsequential as years went by. Yet it preserved a truth waiting for the right moment to surface. Almost by chance, the box survived potential threats: a minor flood in the basement, leaks in the roof during monsoon rains, a push for purges during the office's digitization of old files. Each time, the contents emerged intact, patiently, awaiting a modern catalyst that could bring Dora's story back into focus. Her family aged alongside the case. Her parents grew quieter, their gestures tinged with the subtle weight of unresolved grief. Her mother still set a place at the table in memory of evenings spent together, while her father often wandered through the house, imagining her return. Her younger brother, now in his 20s, carried a persistent unease, replaying the fleeting shadow he had seen that night and questioning endlessly what could have been done differently. Each photo of Dora tucked into albums, each memory retold. Among friends and relatives, preserved both love and regret in equal measure. Meanwhile, Dora herself, unknown to her family and the authorities, lived elsewhere under a different name. Small inconsistencies in official records, slight adjustments to dates of birth, and fabricated personal history allowed her to move through a life carefully curated by another. No one suspected. Teachers, employers, and neighbors occasionally sensed a slight incongruence in her story or hesitated at certain answers. But with no integrated digital databases and limited communication across counties, there was no system to catch the subtle discrepancies. She moved through the world with a quiet displacement, the echo of a life she could not name lingering in her mind, a fragmented sense of home and self, ever present but never fully grasped. Retired investigators sometimes reflected on the unsolved case. In interviews with new officers or in casual conversations over coffee, the disappearance of Dora Carter was described with measured frustration. They noted how meticulous evidence preservation had been, how the footprints, charm bracelet, and drag marks had been cataloged correctly, and how the shadowed memory of a witness at the scene had been recorded despite initial skepticism. Yet the tools of the era, the lack of DNA profiling for routine collection, no centralized fingerprint system, no integrated national missing person database, had made the investigation painfully slow. The resolution deferred indefinitely. If you could tell someone what really happened all those years ago, who would you speak to first? The case box, undisturbed on its high shelf, seemed almost to breathe in the quiet storage room. Dust settled over its edges, the manila folder inside. Still crisp, a silent witness to both Dora's absence and the enduring hope that one day, the truth long deferred would emerge. Under a new name, Dora navigated life with the same quiet diligence that had defined her in Canyon City, yet everything felt subtly off-kilter. She was no longer the diner waitress of her hometown, Instead, she lived in a neighboring state, enrolled in a community college, occasionally working retail or small service jobs. Her paperwork, school registrations, job applications, even a driver's license carried inconsistencies she could not reconcile. Fabricated details inserted by the person who had taken her, shaping her identity without consent. Each time she presented a document, she felt a faint tremor of uncertainty, a subtle anxiety that the facts of her own life were a story someone else had written. The inner dislocation she experienced was relentless. Flashbacks came in brief, fragmented bursts. The smell of pine, a specific breakfast table arrangement, the soft hum of a refrigerator, or the glow of a bedside lamp. These moments left her questioning her own memory, doubting her perceptions, yet somehow sensing that the pieces belonged to a life she had lost. Social interactions were carefully managed, her naturally shy and conflict-averse personality blending into the background, avoiding attention. Friends and colleagues found her reliable, diligent, and polite. Yet she never allowed anyone close enough to notice the persistent unease underlying her composure. Decades of systemic blind spots had allowed this life to continue unchecked. Paper records remained isolated by counties. No centralized registry flagged her new identity against missing person files. The technology of the earlier years had been inadequate to detect such subtle falsifications, and human oversight could only extend so far. The person who had abducted her had acted within these gaps, and the routine, predictable life of Dora Carter had become an invisible ghost, living under the imposed identity, carefully shielded from the world that once knew her. Then, in 2026, a seemingly ordinary event triggered a breakthrough. Dora had to submit her fingerprints for a mandatory background check associated with a job promotion routine, bureaucratic and utterly mundane. The scanner hummed quietly as her prints were collected, entered into a national database designed to match biometric data for security and law enforcement purposes. Moments later, an alert flashed. Her prints matched a sample preserved from the scene of the 2016 abduction. The dormant case, 10 years untouched, was suddenly active again. For the modern cold case investigator assigned to the file, the moment was electric. They retrieved the original manila folder from storage, carefully noting the photographs, footprints, and drag marks, comparing every detail to the digital records now highlighted by the match. The investigator recognized immediately the importance of this intersection, a living person identified through preserved traces. The culmination of meticulous evidence collection and modern technological reach. Dora, unaware of the alert, went about her day. The gap between past and present about to collapse. The evidence that had waited silently for a decade now demanded attention. The life she had built under a false identity, carefully maintained for years, was about to intersect with the reality of the person she had once been. If you could tell someone what really happened all those years ago, who would you speak to first? The investigator, eyes fixed on the computer screen, pulled the old case file from the shelf, ready to trace every step, every shadow, every fragment of evidence back to the night of her disappearance. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the computer, but history was stirring, poised to reveal truths long suppressed. The modern cold case investigator approached the reopened Dora Carter file with meticulous care. They were methodical, a blend of patience and intuition honed over years of working dormant cases, understanding that every detail, no matter how small, might hold the key to unraveling a decade-old mystery. Photographs of her bedroom, the flattened grass, and the lone footprint were carefully reviewed, alongside witness statements that had once seemed minor, but now suggested subtle, critical clues. Every paper, note, and bagged piece of evidence was scanned, digitized, and cross-referenced with contemporary forensic methods. Laboratory analysis breathed new life into the old traces. Soil samples collected from the backyard footprint were compared with records of locations associated with the abductor over the ensuing years. Fibers from Dora's sweater, preserved in evidence bags, were analyzed with techniques unavailable in 2016, confirming their match to fabrics found in the suspect's residence decades later. Shoe tread analysis, once limited to visual comparison, was now digitized, linking the prints to a specific brand and style commonly worn by someone in the abductor's profession. Utility, tax, and tenant records were pulled, revealing a clear pattern. The adult who had abducted Dora had maintained residences near key locations, traveled with predictability, and had access to the town at the exact times necessary for the crime. The investigator reconstructed a merged timeline, overlaying Dora's disappearance window with the abductor's verified locations. Gaps in movement aligned with the night she vanished, demonstrating opportunity and a troubling level of planning. No other adults in the vicinity could account for such precise timing combined with access. While the abductor was now elderly and living under an assumed name or, in some cases, deceased, the evidence allowed authorities to designate an official primary offender in the reopened file, giving a name to the person responsible, even if justice through trial was no longer possible. As the investigator pieced together the story, the magnitude of the breakthrough became clear. A living person, the long-missing Dora Carter, was about to be restored to her true identity. All prior uncertainties, all red herrings, and every dead end were reframed in light of this new forensic clarity. What had once been a case frozen in fear and speculation was now a narrative of resolution, driven by the convergence of preserved evidence and modern technology. The room, dimly lit with fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead, felt charged with anticipation. The manila folder, dusted from a decade of dormancy, contained more than paper and photographs. It carried the potential to reunite Dora with the life she had been torn from, to validate the intuitions and grief of her family, and to finally bring clarity to a town haunted by unanswered questions. The investigator prepared the next steps carefully. Notification of the appropriate authorities, coordination with social services, and the delicate approach to informing Dora herself. The moment of revelation had to be handled with empathy, precision, and respect for the life she had built under a false identity. The day Dora Carter would finally learn the truth arrived with a quiet tension, the weight of 10 years pressing into a single moment. Authorities approached carefully, aware that the young woman they knew by another name was, in fact, the long-missing 18-year-old diner waitress from Canyon City. As the realization was conveyed that her fingerprints matched the evidence collected at her bedroom and backyard a decade earlier, Dora's initial reaction was a storm of disbelief. Denial and disbelief all at once. Memories she could not place surged. The warm hum of her refrigerator, the flickering bedside lamp, the faint aroma of her mother's cooking. Everything familiar yet foreign, pressing against the life she had known under an assumed identity. A testing followed, conducted with meticulous care. Samples from her surviving family, her parents, now older and grayer, and her younger brother, who had carried the shadow of that night for years, were compared against Dora's own. When the results confirmed a direct biological link, it crystallized the truth. She was their daughter, their sister, the girl who had vanished from a quiet house in 2016. The evidence removed doubt, replacing it with a bittersweet relief, tempered by years of absence and lost time. The first reunion was understated yet profound. In a sunlit room at a neutral location, Dora's family encountered her after years of imagined scenarios and silent grief. Small gestures became monumental, a familiar inflection in her voice, a fleeting nervous glance, the subtle curve of her smile, and the silver locket she had kept hidden under her clothes, a relic of her past she had never known how to explain. Her brother, once only a child, now a young adult, lingered close, scanning her expressions as if hoping to reclaim fragments of the sister he remembered. Parents studied her carefully, taking in the same familiar face they had grieved, but now overlaid with the years of absence. Integrating her two lives was a fragile, emotionally complex process. Dora grappled with the stolen past lost experiences, relationships that had been denied, and the pervasive uncertainty that had defined her adolescence. She also faced the life she had lived under another name, routines she had built, friendships she had cultivated, and the quiet, persistent identity imposed by her abductor. Both worlds demanded acknowledgement, yet neither could fully erase the trauma of separation. Her family, in turn, navigated a spectrum of emotion, relief and joy at her return, anger and sorrow for the circumstances of her abduction, and the sobering realization that years of ordinary life had passed under a cloud of uncertainty. Every touch, glance, and shared memory carried layers of emotion, a blend of familiarity and estrangement, recognition and mourning. Yet in those moments, the truth long delayed provided a foundation for rebuilding, for reclaiming identity, and for acknowledging the courage it took simply to exist after a decade of displacement. The cold case investigator, having guided the reopening of the file, marked it as resolved, yet fully understood that resolution in paper did not erase the personal work ahead. Dora's life, her family's lives, and the collective memory of Canyon City would carry the echoes of that night for years to come. Still, a measure of justice had arrived, names confirmed, truth restored, and a hidden life finally recognized for what it had always been. With Dora Carter's identity confirmed, the final administrative steps were undertaken to formally close the decade-long cold case. The abductor, now identified through investigative reconstruction, was officially named as the primary offender in the reopened file. Though they were no longer available for prosecution, the designation clarified the historical record and ensured that future references to the case acknowledged the truth. The disappearance had been an abduction, not a voluntary absence, and the responsible party was known. Official records were amended to reflect this, giving the stolen years a documented context and recognition. Despite the clarity, many questions remained unanswered. The full motives of the abductor could never be entirely known, why they had chosen Dora, how they had maintained control, and the precise psychological mechanisms that enable a life built on secrecy. Investigators could only speculate, drawing inferences from patterns in the abductor's history, the careful orchestration of the disappearance, and the sustained concealment of Dora under a false identity. These unknowns reminded all involved of the limits of human understanding, even with modern forensic and bureaucratic systems. Yet systemic lessons emerged unmistakably. The case underscored the crucial importance of long-term evidence preservation. Fingerprints, soil samples, fibers, photographs, and witness statements, all stored with care, had allowed a breakthrough even a decade later. The need for interagency data sharing became clear, as did the value of national biometric databases capable of connecting living individuals to historical crime scene evidence. Early witness accounts, especially those initially doubted, were vindicated as critical threads in a larger tapestry, demonstrating the necessity of documenting and preserving every observation from vulnerable witnesses. Emotionally, the resolution provided Dora and her family with the possibility of closure, though not in the conventional sense of undoing lost years. Truth restored her identity, allowing her to reclaim a name and history that had been stolen. For her family, it offered validation for the grief, the guilt, and the years spent imagining what had happened, affirming that their love and hope had not been misplaced. The late arrival of justice, while bittersweet, reshaped the narrative of their lives, offering dignity, recognition, and a chance to rebuild relationships with honesty as a foundation. Canyon City, too, felt the resonance of the case's conclusion. The story of Dora Carter became a quiet emblem of both vulnerability and resilience. A reminder of the importance of community vigilance, methodical law enforcement, and the enduring power of persistence across decades. The night she disappeared remained a shadow in memory, but the daylight of truth had finally arrived, illuminating what had been hidden for 10 long years. And when you're ready, click the video on the right to explore another case.